I would say when I was 8 or 9 or 10 years old, somewhere around that period of time, I remember going out into the backyard of our home where we lived after dinner and just sitting on the lawn and eventually just lying back on the lawn and gazing at the moon and gazing at the stars. And at that age, not really understanding why I was doing that, what was driving me to do that, but it was something was definitely compelling me to do that. And I'd spend a lot of time just lying on the grass, gazing at the moon and the stars. And then as the Apollo program and Mercury and Gemini and then Apollo program started to occur in the early 60s, and I was in elementary school, and I remember when teachers would wheel in the black and white TVs on a TV cart so we could watch the liftoffs and the splashdowns, and I just thought, like most kids, I think that was just the most amazing thing. So my interest started at a very young age, but it would evolve over time, of course. I think at the same time, I became interested in science fiction, and the original Star Trek was a big influence on me. And in college, I started thinking about, gee, is there some career opportunity in the space program? And so that influenced where I went to graduate school and what I did in graduate school and how I started my professional life. So it's been there for a very long time. I've come to realize it's very much an innate part of me. It's still something in my soul. And I was just telling somebody yesterday, there are still many evenings when my wife and I are maybe out to dinner or something, and as we're walking back to our car in the parking lot, I always look for the moon. And if it's there, I don't care if it's a full moon, a half moon, a sliver of a moon, I will still stop. And my wife's used to this now. I'll still stop and I have to look up at the moon and just stand there and look at it. So it's just my nature. It's part of who I am.
What was your undergraduate program, and what did you start working in the space industry?
Well, if you look back at my education and my initial career, it has very little direct connection. My education, my bachelor's degree is sociology and psychology. Now my master's, which is a future studies degree, has a little bit more of a connection. I went to school at the University of Houston, the Clear Lake campus, which is adjacent to Johnson Space Center. And that's one of the reasons I chose to go there, because I love the idea of a future studies degree, but I also thought, wow, there's got to be some stuff I can do, in my graduate studies. And I did, like, one semester I worked with, I don't remember his name. Yes, I do. Professor Larry Bell, I think, who was at the main campus of the University of Houston, which has one of the country's most well-known hotel management schools. There's a Hilton Hotel on the campus of the University of Houston, the main campus. And he was then under a contract or a project with, whether it was Hilton or maybe it was Hilton and a Japanese construction firm, studying the ideas of an orbiting hotel. Now this is back in the late 70s and the early 80s. And I worked with him and his team for a semester. I ended up doing my graduate internship at NASA headquarters in the first half of 1981. And so I really wanted to do something in the space industry. But I knew I wasn't going to be an astronaut because I don't have that mathematical skill level to be an engineer at that depth. So my girlfriend at the time said, why don't you go interview with IBM? This is in Houston still. They're hiring like crazy. They'll train you to be a systems engineer. And they do a lot of work with NASA. Maybe you can get involved with that. And I thought, that's a great idea. And that's what I did. And that's what happened. IBM hired me. They trained me as a systems engineer. And then I got on the NASA team at Johnson Space Center. So from about 1981 to near the end of 1985, I got to work with NASA and subcontractors. But what happened during that time was something I did not expect. Now that I was on the inside and working closely with NASA, I became slowly but very thoroughly completely disenchanted, because I realized this was not the NASA anymore that had taken us to the moon, that I held in such high esteem. And I eventually became so disenchanted, I couldn't stand to be a part of it anymore because I couldn't fix it. I didn't want anything to do with it. So I eventually got off the NASA team. I stayed with IBM. But I was so emotionally bothered by this, I actually wrote an op-ed for the Houston Chronicle talking about the end of my love affair with NASA. And it was shortly thereafter that I learned about the Space Frontier Foundation. So I was looking for some other way to stay involved with space, but I didn't want to do it through NASA. And I met Jim Muncie, who was in town. I was involved with an effort to raise money for a private lunar prospector mission, it was called. And that's how I ended up learning about this organization. That's how I discovered, well, what do you know? Capitalism, space. So, and that's a lot more than you asked, but that's how it all started for me. So my first professional life was in information technology, but it was a means to an end. But that end, being on the NASA team, ended after about 4.5 years because, as I said, I just couldn't stand to be part of it. And then this organization was like a breath of fresh air to me. And so I've been a part of this almost constantly since then.